World War II was both the most widespread and the deadliest war in human history. Several events throughout the war were notable enough to have a profound impact on today's education in the Western world, such as the Holocaust with 13 million casualties, or the Battle of Normandy, a single battle with hundreds of thousands of casualties on both the Allied and the Axis sides. But Western education often tends to forget the atrocities that occurred in the Asian arena, perhaps the most notable of which was the rape of Nanjing in December of 1937. Over a period of 6 weeks, the Japanese troops systematically murdered, raped, and looted the citizens of the Chinese capital of Nanjing, with ultimate casualties estimated at somewhere around 300,000 Chinese. The fallout of this event drives a fundamental part of Chinese nationalism, the bitter hatred of Japan and its people. The Nanjing Massacre Memorial Hall only perpetuates this acrimony. We believe that the current massacre memorial is a flawed representation of the Nanjing Massacre and its mark on history, because it maintains the stage of anger in Chinese citizens, instead of allowing them to heal and move on from the wounds of the event. The Nanjing Massacre Memorial should be redesigned to break the cycle of animosity between Japan and China, and allow the Chinese to continue through the stages of grief identified by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. The memorial should strive to forgive but not forget.
Our group decided to use the endless knot to represent the cycle of hatred between China and Japan. The endless knot is a very important symbol in Chinese culture. It is a Buddhist symbol of a knot that overlaps and loops back to itself without a true beginning or end. China needs to make the first step to break the cycle of animosity by exiting out the endless knot. We leave the Chinese people with the question whether or not they want to exit the cycle of hate.
As I mentioned earlier, we believe that the current Nanjing Massacre Memorial Hall should be redesigned, as it perpetuates the cycle of animosity between China and Japan. The current memorial centers too heavily on anger. As renowned psychologist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross argued, anger is an important stage in mourning, but grievers should not be given a person or idea to direct this hate towards, as this is only detrimental to the mourning process. However, the memorial goes exactly against this idea, using loaded language and other rhetorical techniques on its plaques and images to inspire a passionate hatred of Japan and its people. Instead of trying to provide a more fair assessment of the event, the current memorial appeals to emotion, the anger towards and fear of the Japanese people. Kubler-Ross identifies the key stages of grief as denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. We hold that the Chinese citizens should be allowed to progress through the stages of grief naturally, instead of being artificially held at the stage of anger by the Chinese government. In order to reflect this in our redesign of the memorial, we decided to divide the interior into 5 sections representing the 5 stages of grief. This would provide viewers with the tools necessary to mourn in a more complete manner than simply brooding in anger. Once the Chinese can come to terms with the events
Our
that occurred
design
during
was
World War
inspired
II,
by both the Interlace
only
project
then
in
can they
Singapore
begin
by
the
Ol
process
Sheeran
of breaking
and
the
the
cycle
9/11
and
Memorial.
rebuilding trust between the
In
two
both of
countries.
the architectures, peace and serenity is one of the main goals. In the Interlace project, architect Ol Sheeran proposed to put the apartments into horizontal position instead of keeping them vertical. This design was able to tell a story of its own: the people who built it, the people who designed it, and the people who live in it. This inspired us to overlap the building with itself to make it look more realistic and tell the story of what the Chinese have been through. A fact that Ol Sheeran stated about the Interlace was that 112% of the land in the residential area was covered with trees and nature. This design feature inspired us to create a memorial with more green than man-made, emphasizing the importance of peace and serenity. The 9/11 Memorial inspired us to create a large space where people can pray and mourn in a peaceful atmosphere. People often believe that a memorial museum is only a place to remember the past, but we wanted to also emphasize that a memorial museum is a place to mourn, pray, and meditate. We created slanted hills of grass with wooden benches. These areas are for elders and people who have lost loved ones to mourn and pray. There they can hear the blowing of leaves and the flowing of water around them. These sounds and objects are usually associated with peace and serenity. We also decided to incorporate the endless knot design into the armrests of the chairs. We decided to also add a folding umbrella on the chair so they can block rain and sunlight. This design allows museum goers to visit, pray, and mourn on the days that have light rain or a lot of sunlight. Another design feature are the water canals that flow down beside the walkway and in the grass field. The flowing water symbolizes washing away the bad blood and pain of the event. These canals are 15 centimeters wide and 5 centimeters deep, allowing people to walk over it without having the risk of getting their shoe wet, yet also being large enough to be noticed and have a calming effect. At the end of the canals, the water falls down into an area where it will be recycled back to the top of the hill. This waterfall sound will create a sense of peace and serenity, as it is one of the sounds in nature. Another design feature are the flower beds in the middle of the walkway. The flower beds add to the peace and serenity of the environment. The last design feature of our museum are the roofs above the walkways. In order to maintain the atmosphere and visibility at night, we decided on putting lights under the water canals so they can reflect up onto the ceiling of the walkway roofs, which would create a soft light which would allow the mourners to be at peace. The effect that is casted on the roofs are seen as peaceful because of its natural flow.
You may have noticed a large bowl of rice that takes up a large amount of the museum's peripheral area. We chose to have this because it is a symbol of mourning, and because it provides perspective into the magnitude of the loss the Chinese suffered. In some Chinese culture, when a loved one dies, their relatives will make an offering of a bowl of rice with chopsticks sticking straight up out of it. In order to reflect this tradition, we created a large bowl of rice that would have 300,000 chopsticks sticking out of it to represent the 300,000 victims of the massacre. It's important to note that we did not use actual rice or porcelain on this sculpture. This is because rice will go bad after some time and attracts insects, and porcelain is too fragile for the purposes of this sculpture. Instead, the sculpture would be made of concrete, a far more durable and sturdy material.
This building tries to be as energy efficient as possible without affecting the design. The building uses recycled steel beams as supporting structures, reducing the energy produced in making the steel by about 75% and saves space in landfills, requiring less material than wooden beams while also being more durable. The white paint on the walls of the building culturally is a solemn funeral color, but also helps reduce the amount of thermal transfer into that building through radiation by reflecting light and heat away from the building. Windows on the building will be low emissivity or low E windows with a clear coat of metallic oxide on them to further reflect heat and therefore reduce radiation. The windows will also be triple insulated in order to insulate the interior from the exterior and prevent conduction, allowing the interior to maintain its warmth in the winter and its coolness in the summer. The walls are built with structural insulation panels in order to further limit conduction from the outside atmosphere. This room represents the stage of anger from the Kubler-Ross model. It highlights the brutality of the Nanjing massacre. Many of the elements from the original memorial were put in this room because this stage was covered comprehensively in the original memorial. When you enter the room, you can see the display cases lined up against the walls, featuring articles from the era and evidence of the brutality. Posters with images of atrocities are on the wall above the display cases. Testimonies from eyewitnesses and victims hang from the ceiling. As you walk further, you see a giant painting showing the orgy of murder through showing a pile of dead bodies. Opposite from that wall is a large television screen playing video detailing the events that occurred in the massacre. This room is meant to unleash and embrace the sense of anger within the viewer, even utilizing the color red to symbolize anger. This room represents the penultimate stage, depression. It is simple and minimalistic, and in some ways almost similar to a funeral or a tomb. The room is draped in black, which symbolizes depression. As you enter the room, you first see the mass graves of victims of the massacre, which are akin to the coffin in a tomb. Then there are the names of the victims written over the walls next to the mass graves, like a tombstone. Under the names are tables with flowers and other items on top, just like the pedestal of the tombstone. Next to the names is an epitaph, which is already present in the current memorial. This room brings up sorrow for what happened and is a funeral, allowing a bygone to be a bygone.
The last stage is acceptance. In this stage, the visitor has reached to a stage where they have accepted the reality of the event and can then move on. In this stage, it would mean putting aside the bad blood between the Chinese and the Japanese. In the final room, entitled Hallway of Leadership, visitors walk down a hallway. On the right side, pictures of China's previous leaders such as Sun Yat-sen, Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, Zhou Enlai, up to Xi Jinping. Facing directly across from the leaders, their achievements in peace and diplomacy will be presented to the viewers. At the end, there's a mirror on the right and a blank page on the left to symbolize that choice is now in the hands of the audience. They have the power to decide if they want to move past the acrimony between China and Japan.